Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement. We're in the middle of a C64 Repair-a-thon. I've already put out parts 1 and parts 2, where I looked at machines 1 and machine 2. And today's video, the third machine. Again, like the other two parts, I have no idea what's wrong with this machine, so this might be a simple fix, or it might be a complicated one. The first two machines were kind of broken. If you haven't watched part 1 and 2 yet, I recommend you do that first, although these are standalone episodes, though I may refer back to stuff that happened in those previous episodes when I fix these machines. So without further ado, let's get right to it. Well, here we are with machine number 3. Wow, this thing is pretty rough shape. I do remember this was a mail call item because I could see that there's paper stuck inside the keyboard between the keys. But look at the back here. It's like there's glue or something happened on the thing here. The clips are actually not broken. All 3 are intact. I just obviously already took this thing apart. On the bottom, not much to report. Could tell this is an NTSC unit though, because it has an FCC ID sticker here. Let's lift the hood on this. The screws are already out. Oh, look. Black screen, August 3rd, 2020. Interesting that I didn't even take the RF shield out. I obviously just did a quick test and then just put the lid back on. Let me pull this board out of the case. Maybe this will be an easy fix. Maybe it won't. Although, right off the bat, just like machine number 2, we only have the SID in a socket and the VIC in a socket, undoubtedly under the cover here. Everything else is soldered, which makes it that much harder to fix. And just like machine number 2, this is of that time period, looks like mid to early 83 based on the date codes, when these machines were extremely unreliable, in the long run that is, and it's the custom chips that fail, the MOSFET chips. Doesn't appear to be a full complement of screws. There appears to be 4, or I guess 5 actually, because I took 5 out. But maybe that means someone has been inside this machine. I don't know. There we go. Goodbye, horrible paper RF shield. There's some of the paper remnants that I see inside the keyboard in the bottom of the case. Oh, it's falling out on the desk. This was used as packing material. I can't remember the name of the gentleman who sent these to me, but he found, if I recall, 3 Commodore 64s in the trash, and he saved them, and they're in rough shape, like this one. So he sent these to me, and I recall that one of them, the whole case was very broken, but I think that motherboard actually worked, because I noticed of the 5 machines for the Repair-a-thon here, that is not one of them. So the RF shield is installed on the bottom of this, has not been taken off, which I take it means this hasn't been reworked. It does not have MT RAM chips, it has Hitachi RAM chips, which are actually 300 nanosecond parts. And I remember if it was in part 2, when I was testing out RAM on that 64, and I stuck some 300 nanosecond RAM on there, and I wasn't sure if that was fast enough for the 64, but clearly it is if that's what this thing has. All right, first step, pop out the SID chip, just in case that still works. I'm also gonna pop open the RF shield here where the VIC is, just so I can take a look inside there, in case it's missing. Looks like I have not opened it. No, it's not missing, it's there. Off with the thermal compound as I normally do. It's not necessary, I just like to see what version of the chip we're talking about. Sweet, 6567 R8. That is one of the ones I like. I'm popping the VIC chip out. It actually came out quite easily. It was in there though, but I'll pop that out just so I can test the voltage rails really quickly. Just like with machine number 2, I don't remember how much troubleshooting I actually did on this thing. So I hopefully tested the voltage rails before I turned it on last time. 4.97, that is excellent. And 11.8, a little bit low, but that's fine. I am going to swap out this machine with my ZIF machine here and do a quick test of the VIC chip and the SID chip. It is definitely possible that a bad VIC chip could result in just a black screen. So there's the ZIF machine working, so just always good to check first time. Maybe I forgot to put a RAM chip in like it did last time. And if I do that, I could be going down a path that I didn't intend to. All right, so this is VIC2 chip from machine number 3. And take a look at that, garbage. Let's just try to reseat this in here. In fact, let me check all the pins. They look good. Remember on machine 1, I had put the chips in here and I was getting garbage, and it was actually just, they weren't seated correctly. Oh no, it really isn't working. That's not good. Oh, what a shame. Let me just give it a push when I turn it on. Ah, what a shame that this chip is bad. I'm gonna call it that this is definitely not working. Obviously, with projects like the VIC2 Kawari, that's the FPGA replacement chip. I recently put out a video about that if you haven't watched it yet. That means there's hope for machines that have bad VIC chips, but these chips are getting really hard to find and they're relatively expensive. You might have to spend $30, $40, $50 on eBay, for instance, to find a replacement VIC2 chip. And every time I've been turning this on, we've been getting different patterns, and this time it's just a black screen. So that machine may actually work, except for the VIC. Well, that is a real bummer. Bad VIC chip. All right, well, back in with the working chip here, and I guess I should test out that SID. Maybe it works. All right, so yeah, the machine is definitely working with its original VIC. There it is. All right, out with the known good SID chip and in with the one from machine number 3. Well, the machine boots, that's a good sign. So I'm gonna put in the easy flash. We'll just do a quick 8-bit dance party, or an attempted one at least. I am not really holding out hope that this chip works. It was from the era of 64s where the SIDs are always bad. Not to mention, the VICs are definitely more reliable. And I'm hoping that someone didn't feed the wrong voltage into that machine. Maybe that's why it was in the trash. Might have super duper carnage with tons of bad chips on there. Anyhow, controller's plugged in. Let's see if we can do a dance party. Adrian's tool, 8-bit dance party. Here we go. Nope. That's a bad SID. And in case anyone wants to hear the SID tester, let's try this. Oh, this, you can barely hear anything. It's very, very broken. There was a little bit of sound coming out of voice 1 triangle, but I'm not hearing anything now, just a constant background noise. So we have right off the bat, bad SID, bad VIC, the 2 most valuable chips inside that computer. Very early on, X is on chips, that's for sure. To do any further testing on this machine, I will need a working VIC2 chip. It generates the clock signal for the CPU. So I'm gonna go to machine number 1 here, and I'm gonna pull out the VIC chip that's in here. I'm not using the one out of the ZIF machine, specifically because A, it's got a heatsink stuck to it, so it doesn't fit because of the shielding right here. All right, let's see how this thing works, if at all, with the known good VIC2 chip in here. We have the monitor turning on, but I don't see anything coming out of it at all. Okay, so oscilloscope time. I'm gonna check pin 1 on the CPU for the clock signal. There it is, 1.0227 megahertz. That looks correct. So that is coming from the VIC2 chip itself. It's generating the CPU clock. All right, I'm on pin 20 on the kernel ROM on the chip select line. Look at that. It looks exactly the same as machine number 2. The PLA must be bad again. And that's chip select line on the basic ROM. If I turn it off and on, oh, that just, yeah, I don't see any bursts of activity. Oh, actually, no, there was a quick burst. Okay, yeah, there's something, so that looks okay. That's the kernel ROM, not looking good. And the character ROM, and that looks fine. But for sure, the kernel ROM is being selected all the time, so it's causing a bus conflict exactly like on the previous machine. So I guess the logical step is to remove the PLA and socket that, and then try a different one. And we'll see at least if that bus conflict clears on the ROM chip. And the PLA is socketed. I'm running out of the good quality sockets. I had to use this cheaper one that I had in my parts bin. Here is the 82S100 that we've been testing with all the machines with. I have to wonder where this PLA came from. Anyways, we know it works. We have seen it work on other machines. Connect up the video, connect up the power, and here we go. Let's turn this on. And would you look at that? It just came right up. We didn't even have to use the dead test cartridge because it seems like the RAM is working because the Hitachi makes good quality RAM, I guess. So let's put the diagnostic cartridge in here and see if it can run through a full suite of RAM tests. I just had a thought. I'm gonna look and make sure there's no paper in the cartridge slot. There isn't any. Some fell out right here, but there is none in the actual slot. That could cause a problem for the diagnostic cartridge. Well, at least it's passing RAM test 1, so we know that the CPU is not bad, at least not bad like it was on machine number 2. All right, so that looks good considering that there's no harness connected. So I'm just gonna clean off the user port and the cassette port and we'll plug in the harness. Okay, interesting. Cassette bad, keyboard bad, and control port bad. I wonder what that's all about because it points to the CPU being bad, not one of the two CIAs, 8510. Let me just check all my connections here. And yeah, it's still showing up here. I think the control port again is the SID that's missing, but these two, that's not good. Another bad CPU. I guess I need to pull the CPU out and test it in a different machine. I still feel sometimes that these two functions require the CIAs to be working correctly, although maybe not. It's because this whole test harness, it really needs the user port working, which means these two CIAs need to be working correctly because I think this one here handles the user port. So I'm almost skeptical if it's detecting issues and it's saying the CPU is bad. Is it really the CIA? Oh, could be the CPU though. The CPU on the Commodore 64, it does handle the cassette port. You saw the light came on and off there, right? So that does imply, you know, hold on a second. When I made this test harness, this ribbon cable, it's not exactly the right thread pitch. I bought it from China and I bought all these connectors from there too, and it didn't really fit properly because for whatever reason, the thread or the pitch of these wires is slightly off. So it doesn't quite make really good contact inside these connectors. So I'm wondering with this disconnected, is it just gonna say the same thing? Wait a second, now the keyboard shows as good, but interrupt is bad, and now it doesn't show the CPU being bad, it shows the two CIAs. All right, well, I think that it sort of implies actually that this cable was making good contact. And that means that the CPU may indeed be bad. So I'm gonna have to pull that out now, socket that, test that in the other machine. All right, wait a second. That fixed it, look. So the control port is still bad because of the SID, but those are good now, all of a sudden, just because I fiddled with this. So I think it was just making a bad connection on the cassette port. All right, well, thumbs up. That was a relatively easy fix. Of course, this machine has fundamental problems in that it's missing its VIC2, it's missing its SID. The PLA is not a big deal because we have easy, cheap replacements now. But these two chips, not quite so easy. But the rest of the motherboard is working properly, so that's nice. So let's take a couple notes here. Number 3, fixed. And the date is 3/2021. I just put the month, doesn't really matter. Bad PLA, bad SID, and bad VIC. But otherwise, except for those bad chips, this motherboard is now fixed. And as I talked about in part 2, this generation of board is just fundamentally unreliable because the PLAs are essentially always going to be bad, and the SIDs are pretty much the second most failed chip on this era of machines. The early 82 ones are fine. The later 80s ones are fine. It's this like mid 83 into the 84s. They're all just dying. And this one had the bad VIC2 as well. So since that was a relatively easy fix for machine number 3, why don't we take a look at machine number 4? Oh, I almost forgot. I can't move on to the next machine before we take these and put them in the dead parts bin. So we have a bad 6581 SID chip, we have a bad VIC2 chip, and we have a bad PLA. Whoa, it went flying. There it is. I really need to expand to dead parts too, because this thing is just chocker block overflowing, filled with dead parts. All right, here is machine number 4, another bread bin. It's from David, a local viewer here in Portland, who actually just recently gave this to me, 3/2021, so this month. Has a black screen. It's pretty clean, actually, this machine. Nothing much to report. It's an unremarkable bread bin. It is almost certainly exactly the same internally as the last one we just looked at, which unfortunately means that the faults might be the same, might be the exact same faults, or at least bad PLA chip. And I have not opened this up, actually. I just powered it on, and that was it. Uh-oh, it's got a broken standoff right there. Whoops, it just kind of came apart there. I think with this piece here, I can use Jeff Burt's repair kit. And you have to kind of glue this part back on, and there's a sleeve that goes on it. So that can be repaired. Oh, someone has been in here because this metallic tape here is torn. Oh, Commodore, so stingy. 6581 soldered. There's one thing in a socket. It's the kernel ROM, and that is it. Oh, and also these two chips here. These are MOS 7708s, which are Commodore version of the 74LS257, if I recall. And these chips are very failure prone. Any of these MOS branded TTL logic chips, who knows why they were making bespoke versions of those chips, but they were. But I guess thank you, Commodore, for putting them in sockets. Is that because you knew they were so unreliable that you had to socket them? Oh, okay, this is also kind of weird. The RAM, Oki, Motorola, Hitachi, Motorola, Oki, Motorola. I'll know when I take the board out if someone has reworked this and changed this, but what's this from the factory? This hodgepodge of RAM? I mean, Commodore, I know it's fine. It's really not a problem. It just seems weird to just have such a random assortment of chips. Let's pop the cover on the VIC chip. I am imagining that this is going to be another R8. And that is exactly what it is. It's the shiny package though, so it was made in a different fab. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's more reliable. Who knows? I may as well just remove this from the case. It's almost certainly got a bad PLA. And I'm going to have to remove that chip and put another socket in there. And I'm running out of sockets. I should have known before starting a C64 Repair-a-thon to have lots of that size sockets. Incidentally, the date codes is right in that trouble period, 34th week of 1983, 43rd week of 83. So it's in that sort of later 83 period where everything dies. There we go, come on out. Cardboard RF shield, bye-bye. The bottom RF shield is not fully attached. Might not be attached at all. Someone had just bent the little clips back over it. Actually, with the RF shield, I stand corrected. It is soldered on this side, but not on this side of the board. So that's weird. That's probably just like that from the factory. All right, I think it's free. It's free, it's free. Okay, goodbye RF shields. All right, let's take a look on the underside. Has anyone reworked this thing? No, I would say there has not been any rework. It's dusty under here, but that's it. So this weird hodgepodge of RAM is definitely from the factory. These two sockets and that socket are original as well. All right, first things first, I'm gonna yank out the VIC2 chip because we're gonna test that in the other machine, and I'll pop out the kernel ROM as well. Out with that VIC, in with this VIC, and on the monitor, we have a working image. So this VIC2 chip works. That is excellent. And while I'm at it, I'm gonna pop this kernel ROM into the board here, and we'll just make sure that that works as well. Just need to straighten its legs out a little bit so it fits in this socket properly. And it's working, excellent. The colors are different, of course, because mine was modified with the white text, but that's the stock kernel. It's the version 3 of this chip, and it works. So this chip gets a check mark as does this working VIC-2 chip. Excellent. I'm just gonna spend a moment and try to clean some of this white thermal compound off the edge of this VIC-2 chip. It's sort of all over the legs. It's definitely non-conductive, so it's not harmful to have it on there. It's just kind of annoying because you get it on your fingers and stuff. As I have mentioned before, you definitely need a working VIC-2 inside a Commodore 64 or you don't get working clock signals, so the machine definitely won't operate at all without the chip installed. All right, I've powered up the oscilloscope again because we are going to check that chip select line on the kernel ROM, which it is nice because we have actually been able to remove it. So if that line is stuck, that means that there won't be a bus contention because the chip is out of there. So I'm on pin 20 and let's turn it on. Oh, you know what? I mean, that looks normal. So why are we getting a black screen exactly? What's happening? Let's put this back in. Actually, you know what? Let's just go right for dead test. Before I power this up with dead test, I do have to say that the PLA has other failure modes besides the kernel ROM thing, which we happen to have seen twice already on this Repair-a-thon. So just because it looks normal on this machine doesn't mean that has not failed in some other way. So let's see what happens with this. Oh, hey, we're getting flashes for bad RAM. We're getting 4 flashes. Interesting. The machine is executing code. Typically, if the PLA is bad, you're not necessarily going to get any flashes. On the other hand, it's probably possible that you can get flashes. In fact, the flashing has stopped, which is an indicator that there are more problems. It shouldn't stop if it's just simply bad RAM. So that kind of indicates that there's other problems with the machine. Let's turn it on and see if we get the same number of flashes. We get 1 flash and then it stops. Yeah, this is definitely, dead test is not working correctly, which implies that there are more issues with this machine. Since the era that this 64 comes from, the PLA is the most unreliable chip, I'm absolutely going to be suspecting that the PLA is the problem. So I have this on dead test. Let's turn this on. Oscilloscope is powered up. I connect my ground lead. Hey, wait a second, take a look at this. This actually looks like dead test is running. In fact, I can see the character changing as it moves through. That's part of the normal RAM test. And then definitely the color is working here. So let's turn on the speaker. I still have it hooked up to the SID. There will be a sound check that comes in a second. So I'll be able to hear if there's any sound coming out of this. That will confirm that Diagnostic is running. But I can see it's still moving through here. That implies that the dead test, there it is, it's doing it there. The dead test is actually running right now. Well, look at that, a working SID chip. That's pretty amazing actually. And the thing is running. I mean, it's running code. So the PLA is kind of working. Now, I've had PLAs that were bad before that resulted in graphical corruption like this. Let's just power cycle this and take the cartridge out. I want to see what this looks like at the basic prompt. Hey, wow, look at that. It's garbage. I mean, the colors are all wrong and it's completely trashed, but the machine is actually doing something. So with the dead test back in, it's back where we were, sort of garbage, but running. I want to use the oscilloscope and go over all the outputs on the PLA. See these signals like basic, kernel, char ROM, IO. These are actually what drive the chip select lines. And as we saw in the previous parts, the PLA was holding the kernel ROM low. When you see a little line over the CS or chip select signal here, that's telling you that the chip is turned on when this signal is at ground. When it's up at 5 volts, the chip is turned off. And the way these ROM chips work, for instance, or pretty much any IO chip, is they disconnect themselves from the bus. So that's why when the kernel ROM signal was stuck down near ground, the ROM chip was just selected all the time, which meant it kept its data bus connections active all the time. And really, only one device at a time can be selected. So when the processor tries to read from the kernel ROM, it needs to drive the data bus so that the processor can read those signals, or say the character ROM, or the basic ROM, or really any of the other IO chips on here as well. The I/O output here goes to this enable pin on U15, which does have something to do with the way the VIC and the SID and the color RAM are selected. So it's possible that that signal is not working correctly, causing an issue with the way the VIC, which is up here, here's the VIC, can read and write from RAM. So when I look at these signals on the oscilloscope or the logic probe, none of them should be stuck low. We should see them either transitioning between low and high or just high. It depends on what the computer is doing, depending on how those signals look, but that is the important thing. None should be stuck low. If you see it's the one that's stuck low, right away you know the PLA is probably bad. This is pin 10, this is the ROM high select line, and because there's a cartridge ROM in there, I guess it's doing something, so that signal looks normal. Pin 11 is ROM low, that is just high all the time, so that's fine. 12 is the I/O line, which is high all the time, which I think is fine as well. 13 is GRW, that's fine. 15 is character ROM, that's high all the time, which is totally fine. 16 is the kernel ROM, now this is high, which is how it should look. Now don't forget, the dead test, which is what's in here now, disables the ROM chips. It doesn't need any of the onboard ROMs, so all of these should be high. And pin 17 is the basic ROM, which is high, which is good. And then 18 is CAS RAM, which is one of the refresh signals, and that's changing, which is what it should be doing. So everything on the PLA actually looks fine on this machine. And the fact that it definitely seems to be running because we heard sound out of the SID says that generally things are working on this machine. And when it comes to the garbage on the screen, I know it's not coming from the VIC-2 itself because the VIC-2 is fine, it works fine on another machine, so the fault definitely lies somewhere else. Now on the schematics, when we look at the VIC chip, remember there's the 74LS258, and this has to do with the address lines, and it interacts with this latch down here. I don't necessarily think those are the problems. Remember on one of the parts, I think part 1, I took out both of these chips, and when I did that, we didn't see the same kind of garbage that we're seeing right now on the screen. Now, one thing to consider, and we looked at this before, address lines on the VIC are 0 through 7, and then it has 8 through 13. And those lines are multiplexed. Well, we know this latch right here, that's the 373, it's connected down here, and we can see here address lines 0 through 7. But the higher address lines here go right past the latch over here to these two chips here. These are the multiplexers that go to the RAM. And you'll notice if you look at these lines here, you can see there's A13, A12, A11, 10. So the VIC is keying in to those address lines through these multiplexers. When we look at the garbage here, this definitely looks like it is looking at the wrong part of memory. We just see all this random garbage here. And that's like the VIC is trying to look into memory for what should be on screen, and it's getting back garbage. So it's like when the CPU is trying to write to memory, it's not writing to memory in the right locations. And when you have weird RAM issues, and it kind of goes back to the way the dead test was behaving earlier on, where it was flashing like one RAM chip was bad, and then it would flash a different RAM chip was bad, those can be indicative of PLA failures. But the PLA seems to be working fine because we tested the outputs and they're all good. So I'm thinking that these multiplexers here are the problem. And if we look at the board, the two multiplexers for the RAM are these two ICs right here, these MOS branded ICs that happen to already be in sockets. It has really been my experience that anytime there are 74LS logic chips on the motherboard, it's not necessarily these two, but it could be any of these. When they are MOS branded, they're incredibly failure prone, incredibly. So I think I'm gonna pop these chips out because they're already conveniently in a socket. Thank you very much, Commodore. Now it says MOS 7708. I mean, what does that part number mean? Well, I happen to know that these are LS257s. And we can see that here on the schematic, of course. And I went into my parts bin and I found these two 74LS257s. And you notice the date code there, 79, 1979. These are older than any Commodore 64 even is. So I'll pop these in. Wow, so convenient. If these are the fix, and the Commodore put sockets on there from the factory, how much more convenient can you actually get than that? And here we go, let's turn it on. What's gonna happen? We're gonna get the black screen because this is normal for dead test. It's not flashing bad RAM, which of course is what it was doing. before. Would you look at that? It's working. It fixed it. Bad multiplexers. Let me just let this run through a little bit, make sure it actually passes all the tests. I mean, it was actually passing these RAM checks, but we already determined in part 1 that this thing is a terrible, terrible RAM checker. Like, we would have bad RAM and it would say it was okay. So obviously whatever failure these multiplexers were causing with the RAM wasn't even being picked up by the dead test cartridge anymore. It was initially with those flashes, but those went away and it was running through its cycles all normal. Normally when dead test encounters an error, it actually freezes, stops running. But clearly it was actually cycling because we would hear the SID test tune. But anyways, that's crazy. So yeah, these 2 chips are bad. All right, while that runs through, I'm gonna X these out. X and an X. Yes, all the tests worked here. So I'm gonna power this off and we'll switch to no cartridge and just see if we can get to basic. Boom, it works, it freaking works. Alrighty, it's time for the regular diagnostic, the one that will require the harness. So let's move that out of the way and we'll turn that on. And there it is, working fine. Let's see if it passes the RAM tests. Let me grab the harness. Look at that, all the RAM tests pass. All right, and the SID test even sounds good. That's exciting. I'm just cleaning these edge connectors with some Deoxit before I plug the harness in, since we know can kind of be unreliable. And I cleaned it actually the previous time when it was still acting up. Look at that. Everything is passing. Will it pass the final? Yep, that's it. All chips are good, even that controller port. We kept seeing that as a failure on all the previous tests, and that must have been clearly because there was no SID installed. There's the SID right there, U18. But this has a working SID, therefore it passes every test. So just for fun, I am going to draw check marks on all of these chips here because they are all fully functional, even the PLA. Since this has a working SID, why don't we do a little 8-bit dance party? Let's get the Easy Flash 3 in here. Adrian's Tools, 8-bit dance party. Okay, interesting. The SID sounds a little different than I'm used to, and I think that is because it's one of the earlier versions, I guess. Just different filters. Definitely is working. There's no glitching or anything, so that's great. I'm just going to quickly run the SID tester here. Yep, so all the SID tests sound totally normal through Andrew's SID tester program here. I can't believe us, 1 out of 4 machines have a good SID so far, at least. So, summary time for the number 4 machine. I falsely accused the PLA of being the problem, and it wasn't. It seemed to be looking okay in the oscilloscope, and sure enough, it's actually fine. And the SID, which of course always dies as well, actually works too. Now, it's really annoying that it's soldered in here. I'm probably gonna socket this off camera, after the video series here, just so that is transportable into other machines. But the only actual failure with this machine were these 2 Moss branded 74LS 257s that were replaced with chips that were made when I was only 4 years old. Hey, funny that the number 4 machine has replacement chips that I was 4 years old when they were made, older than the Commodore machine itself, and it's fixed. Come on, Sharpie, come back to life. There we go. David G. Bad. U13 and U25. Fixed. 3/20/21. Well, there we have it for machine 3 and 4 in the Repair-a-thon. Machine 3 wasn't particularly interesting. It really just had a bad PLA, but the SID was also bad, and so was the VIC. And then on machine number 4, the problem was just simply those 2 multiplexers, which I had a hunch would be bad because those Moss branded chips are always bad. So if you have one of these boards and you have those chips socketed and you're having a black screen problem, you might as well just swap them out because they're probably going to be bad. The PLA though still is the most likely failure from this age of machines. So anyways, I hope you found these repairs interesting. If you did, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. If you didn't, you know what to do, all that YouTube-y stuff. There will be one more part to the repair-a-thon, machine number 5. Might be easy, it might be hard, who knows? Anyhow, stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye. I'm waving with Commodore 64s.